Hello, my name is Russ Wigginton, and I serve as the president of the National Civil Rights Museum. The Corporate Equity Center is a diversity, equity, and inclusion experience that can transform how corporations recruit, develop, and retain talent and position their organizations for success now and in the future. As a museum that chronicles the ongoing struggle for civil and human rights and social justice for all, we have a distinct lens in which to assist corporations to eradicate racial bias in the workplace. We all know that employees who feel valued and have a sense of belonging are more likely to reach their full potential, which benefits them and the organizations in which they work. The Corporate Equity Center's first initiative is the C-Suite Initiative, which focuses on increased representation of Black executives in senior leadership and C-suite positions across industries. Currently, too many organizations are unsuccessful recruiting and retaining talented Black leaders who can add tremendous value to their goals. And not enough companies understand why their current efforts are not working. The transformation of representation will only occur with intentionality and boldness. The C-Suite Initiative provides the most senior leaders of organizations the context, strategies, and tools to deepen their resolve to drive systemic change from their unique seat of power. Companies that complete the C-Suite Initiative will be much better equipped to rectify the long-standing void of Black senior leaders. By having leaders who are more representative of our society, companies can develop stronger work environments and be better poised for short and long-term success.
Greetings. Thank you for joining us for a panel discussion on the National Civil Rights Museum Corporate Equity Center, the C-Suite Initiative. My name is Veda Ajamu. I serve as Managing Director of DEI Programs and Community Engagement at the National Civil Rights Museum. Following the murder of George Floyd in 2020, national protests, and persistent social unrest, the National Civil Rights Museum sought to develop world-class programming based on the historical root causes of civil rights issues in America to create positive change, thereby establishing the Corporate Equity Center with the generous support of AutoZone. The C-Suite Initiative combines the historical knowledge of the National Civil Rights Museum with the need for strategic and culturally relevant leadership on eradicating racism in corporate America, with the goal of increasing the representation of Black executives in senior leadership and C-suite positions across industries. We invite you to join us for a dynamic panel discussion with Dr. Noel Trent. Dr. Trent is the Director of Interpretation, Collections, and Education at the National Civil Rights Museum. Valerie Arick Rainford. Valerie is the founder of Allery Talent Strategies, a leadership advisory firm for C-suite executives on advancing Black talent. Dr. Janet Taylor. Dr. Taylor is a community psychiatrist on the front line battling the emotional and economic impacts of mental illness. Charlie Ples III. Charlie is the Senior Vice President of Finance and Accounting and Customer Satisfaction at AutoZone. So my first question for you is, why is the program important to you? And I would like to just start with Noel, and then Valerie, Janet, and Charlie. Will you please share for me?
Well, I think the program is important because it offers corporate America a way to have a conversation about history, but also its impact on our daily lives. As we look at the need for diversity at the highest levels of corporate America, a lot of it is just unfamiliarity with the story. And what you'll get here is a full immersion in the history and a journey that will take you from the past to the present.
Thank you, Noel. Valerie, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Veda, and thank you for having me. So my experience with this work is that leaders are much more likely to be willing to make change when they have a better awareness and empathy for multicultural experiences, and especially the Black experience in America. Understanding the experiences creates a deeper connection to the work and commitment for solving the issues that still plague our society today, that many just are not aware of how the societal inequities continue. And I think when combining awareness, connection, and empathy with facts, it's a powerful combination for change. And I say we have to start by giving all credit to Butch Graves, who saw the power of the possibility in combining the pieces of the work that Dr. Noel Trent does with the work that I do and the work that Dr. Janet Taylor does, and combining the pieces. And so it's the power and uniqueness of the program is what drew me in.
Thank you. Janet.
The uniqueness of the C-Suite initiative is the ability to have the richness of the museum and that historical context, which is so important as you were looking at the framework of why we know that diversity in and of itself is not enough. The inclusion is not enough. It has to be the equity, and that requires changes from a leadership perspective. And certainly with the richness of the history that all of us on this panel bring, it's that ability to give that unique perspective to individuals, allowing them to hopefully, with their colleagues, form their own opinions, but walk away knowing that they are different, and more importantly, a willingness to action, which includes awareness, which includes empathy, which includes some connection, but knowing that we have a lot of work to do. And so my experience developing this and being in working on the panel has just enriched me in a way that I know that it will enrich the CEOs and senior leadership who certainly take advantage of this once in a lifetime opportunity.
Thank you. Charlie.
Hi, thanks, Vita, and thanks for having us on here. I think it's all of those things that the ladies have expressed, and one of the things for me is getting a chance to work with such a talented group. Um, AutoZone's big initiative here was really around trying to make a difference. After the murder of George Floyd, we wanted to do more than just talk about it and put money towards it. We wanted to actually have impact and, deliver on something that we think this is going to really help other corporations improve and make change, and not only their organizations but in their communities. And so the only way you do that is to get together, to talk about it, have these conversations. And for us, this is going to help C-suite groups to have tough conversations that they normally would feel uncomfortable doing. And so for me, it's very powerful. And I'm looking forward to many other companies joining it, just as AutoZone has.
Thank you, Charlie. So that's a great lead-in for my next question. What sets the C-Suite initiative apart from any other program, any other DEI program that's out there?
I think the first thing that we're rooted in is the history, right? The National Civil Rights Museum is a unique space. We are located at the historic Lorraine Motel, where Dr. King was assassinated at 6:01 p.m. on the balcony of room 306. There is nowhere else in the world where you can encounter that story face to face. And so, as an institution and a historic site, there's power in the place that we're located. But then there's also power in the objects that we bring out that have witnessed this history. And that we force people to encounter some of these more difficult stories, not just through the exhibitions, but through interacting with artifacts and objects from those times, and that allowing that to facilitate greater conversation.
Thank you, Noel and Vita. I would add that most organizations and leaders inside organizations, believe it or not, in 2022, still do not understand the history that Dr. Trent just talked about, right? Like you're dependent upon some schools, increasingly fewer of them that have history. So you're depending on people to learn on their own. You're dependent upon organizations to offer bias training and people connecting the psychological bias training that they have to the history they may not know. And then you also have some organizations that are looking into the facts that they are sitting on inside their organizations. So what's unique about the C-Suite Initiative program is that we pulled all three of those pieces together to provide a solution. So the first is CEO and C-suite leaders who have the power to make the change, right? Like that's the first requirement of the program. The second is leveraging Dr. Trent and her team and the knowledge that the museum brings to douse the participants in the history and experience of Black America. One day of 400 years of history, drawing parallels to the hundreds of years to modern day inequities that still exist right where they sit, and helping them understand that they have the power to make change. It is very heavy and it is very hard, particularly when Dr. Trent brings out the artifacts that she references. It's hard. I've seen it a number of times. I know Dr. Janet and I talk about it, like we've seen it. It's still hard, but imagine leaders who are sitting in corporate America who maybe they've read a book, but being at the museum is just incredible. And then when Dr. Janet follows that with the psychological and intellectual discussion that they may have had in a session. And then lastly, I bring forward the importance of organizations to understand the data in a disaggregated way, detailing where there are inequities that need to be addressed. So in this 2-day program, they get all of which they may have individually inside their organizations, but more often than not, they do not have them. And certainly nobody has those 3 pieces connected together.
And I would add that the uniqueness of making that commitment as a CEO and senior leadership team from a corporation to physically come and cross the threshold to experience everything that Valerie and Dr. Trent were speaking about establishes a real bar in terms of a willingness to go somewhere else. And as Valerie said, in terms of knowing how the brain works, when we're talking about changing and understanding biases, we're talking about barriers and how we each have that potential and capacity to change our minds and therefore to change action, with the realization that from an economic standpoint and the way the world and workforce is changing, that this is very necessary. So no matter where you start, there's no question that this experience is so unique and so special, because it's guaranteed that you will not get it anywhere else, just by virtue of the fact that you are stepping out of your usual workplace. And being uncomfortably uncomfortable can lead to new insights and again spur those changes that have to happen in corporate America.
Peter, can I add another
Of
point that
course.
I think it's important
Of
here?
course.
I think that the other thing that is really important is the team takes the journey together. So we've designed this as a 2-day program where boards come together, where a CEO and their leadership team come together. We've had of the groups that we have had go through the program so far, like having that team commit to 2 days and walk through a guided tour of 400 years of history together changes the team. Like the team can't leave the museum not being impacted, much of which they may not know. And then to come back and do again the piece with Dr. Janet together, and then to have them dig into, so what do we do back in our offices together? It's a powerful, it's just the setup of it is powerful for any CEO and his or her board or his or her leadership team to do together. And I think it catapults the organization to look at the challenges around diversity, in particular advancing Black talent, differently.
Thank you for adding that, Valerie. So you've talked about what sets the C-suite initiative apart, and you've also talked about the importance of the historical context as well as the location. Is there anything else that you would like to add to the fact that it is crucial that we have the program here at the National Civil Rights Museum? I've gotten the question over and over again, well, can we have it, can we do it virtually? Or can we do it at another civil rights museum and you provide the information and it's taught in a different civil rights museum? Can you just touch just a little bit why the National Civil Rights Museum is the right place to host this?
Well, I will jump in here. As I said before, we are the site where Dr. King was assassinated. There was a international reaction to his death that radiated from the balcony of room 306, and we do not take that mission lightly. We are one of the few accredited museums in the country that dedicated to civil rights that looks at it from a national perspective. And there's an impact to knowing what happened here. From the moment you step into our courtyard, when you step on our grounds, you know that you are on a sacred site. You know that there is power in this place. And it has an impact on what you anticipate and then what you experience. I can't imagine this happening in the same way somewhere else. We have been very deliberate in knowing our role in the nation's history and global history of positioning that for companies to move forward. You can't do this offsite. You cannot do this experience really virtually because there's something that happens when we encounter each other face to face. And I think we've all learned that during the course of the pandemic. And so that's what's really critical about this is that you not only are encountering each other on your team, but you're encountering us as facilitators and the museum. The Lorraine Motel is a very important facilitator through this experience that cannot be anywhere else.
Absolutely. Thank you, Noelle. The power of place. Okay, there are three main components of the C-Suite initiative, and they are presented by Noelle, Janet, and Valerie. And I would like for each of you to please speak to the components of your sessions. And so they are educational, psychological, and analytical. So I would love to hear from you an overview.
Sure. So the experience will start off with an introduction into the history. We provide an overview of the place that they are at, the National Civil Rights Museum. And then we go through the museum with a very specific look at the history from a business perspective, the impact of the economic disenfranchisement and going through that journey. Once we go through our Lorraine Motel building, we do go across the street to the boarding house, which is where the alleged shot was fired from, and we continue the experience over there. That experience concludes back at the museum where we have an overview or we debrief about the experience. We borrow from renowned psychological and studies that talk about the importance of breathing and using that to engage in reflective conversations in smaller groups as well as larger groups. And then we come back together, discuss that, and then move into the relationship between what we've just seen through the last 50 plus years, relating it to voter suppression, mass incarceration, healthcare, health and wellness issues, and education inequity. That is quite a bit, and we know that this information is uncomfortable for people, and there's some discomfort with that. Know that we don't go into this to shock you. There are details that are shocking, but this is a guided experience to take you from being shocked, surprised, upset, frustrated, and angered to a place of understanding and compassion. And we conclude the educational experience with a meal. And it's all related to African American food and food history and a cultural experience where we set it up so you understand the history of the foods that you're eating, and we have a great time because who doesn't love soul food? And it's all food to cater to various palates. And that's the experience of day one. And then we segue into day two with the psychological with Dr. Janet.
So I will take over here. As Nicole said, Dr. Trent, it is definitely an immersive experience, and there's nothing more immersive than understanding from a lens of neuroscience the history of racism in America, the role of bias and microaggressions in the sense that our brain constantly, even people as they're listening to this call right now, your brain is taking in 11 million bits of information per second and consciously only able to process 40. And in an attempt to make it easier, our brain compartmentalizes, which leads to things like bias and stereotypes. And so the take home from that is if we know how the brain works, then we have the opportunity to take what's unconscious and make it conscious, which doesn't give you an out. It means that you can take an action, but also understanding how to mitigate bias and the importance of doing that. So from a psychological perspective, it's not just about presenting facts about, certainly the history of microaggressions, the history of of white supremacy in America, and the need to really eliminate disparities from a health perspective, social, economic, educational, and understanding how racism exists at every single level, but also giving you the tools to do that. And one primary tool is one, awareness, education, but a commitment and dedication to making a change. So from a psychological perspective, knowing that our brain is in our body, our brain wants us to win and not be afraid. But when we see other, we can be afraid, we can shut down and be silent. And one main goal of this experience is not to be silent, but to take action that is informed and educated, knowing that you have the resources. And from an equity standpoint, then we have Valerie Rainford, with her decades of experience and evidence-based information to lead us and lead you where you need to go.
Thank you for that, Janet. I do want to go back to your previous question, Vita, because I feel sort of compelled to answer the why, specifically why the National Civil Rights Museum, and then I'll come back to the module that I instruct. So I'll never forget being asked by the chair of the AutoZone board, are we sure this is the place? And what I said to him at the time was, I'm absolutely convinced that it's the place. Not that we want to take anything else away from any other museum. Like, they're all wonderful commitments to Black history. But what's different about the National Civil Rights Museum, in my view, and I think is important for me to say, since Dr. Noel Trent works there. I don't work there, okay? But it's intimate. It allows you to focus on what you're there for. You have a guided historian taking the tour with you who can answer your questions along the way. There is no other place that you can sit on a bus like Rosa Parks sat on. There's no other place that you can stand, and I have yet to have someone not do this and not be brought to tears, where you can stand where Dr. King was assassinated and take yourself back to that day. There's no other place where you can be 6 inches away from a Ku Klux Klan robe that's not behind some sort of a screen, right? So I think all of those things make it very unique. And for all those people who want to question whether Dr. Noel Trent works there, I don't work there, and I'm telling you, it's the place where you want to do this program. To the piece that I teach, and that is around using data. Our company, Ellery Talent Strategy, specializes in helping companies use their people data to identify where there are inequities in their talent policies and practices. We teach C-suite leaders in this program why it is important to look at the data, but also what they should be asking for. Because the key point here is to move the needle in a significant way. Boards, CEOs, and their C-suite leaders need to start behaving differently. They need to become more comfortable and more aggressive in what to ask for from their teams. And by the way, we know what boards and CEOs ask for is what they get. Having their general counsel and their chief human resources officer and their chief diversity officer and their chief risk officer in the room having the conversation opens up why some chief legal officers and general counsels feel they are protecting data by not allowing it to be disclosed or disaggregated. It's part of the conversation. Allowing the chief people officer or chief human resources officer, who are sitting on the very policies and programs that create inequitable outcomes, is a part of the module. Then delving into workforce and data analytics subjects, most usually by teams who don't really know what to look for beyond pure representation data. And by the way, chief diversity officers who do not have access to the data. We've had individuals come through the program who were chief diversity officers. CEO didn't even realize the significance of having the data. And our program opens up that conversation so everybody understands the power of data. So our approach is to start by educating the C-suite on the power of using data. Why are you not making progress? And have the data refute what I say are anecdotes. For example, I often have CEOs in particular will say to me that we are a meritocracy. And I will say, well, I believe in meritocracy too. I've just never seen one. So if you believe that you're a meritocracy, let's dig into your data and show you where we think there are places where you are not. For instance, one of the things that I say to the CEOs and the C-suite leaders is in a lion's share of organizations where we've done the analysis, Black talent is consistently rated lowest of all cohorts in organizations, right? Those are consistent themes. So, Mr. CEO who sits in this program, I challenge you to be asking those kinds of questions coming out of this program. Um, so I think we use case examples in this module around data, disaggregated data, specifically for Black people, not at the exclusion of other populations, but we know that in most cases where we are in organizations that Black people are bringing up the rear. And unless CEOs and C-suite start doing something differently, we're not going to have change. So I would close by saying that we use the analytics to wrap the other two impactful programs modules that Dr. Noel Trent and Dr. Janet Taylor teach to really give them what they need to go back to the office and start to make change.
Thank you so much for that overview. That was great. And so, Charlie, from a corporate lens, how do you feel the program components fit well together?
I think Valerie and Janet and Noel covered it really well. I mean, if you think in terms of how the program starts, it's a unique experience. It's an experience that I dare say most corporations don't go through. Their C-suites don't go through such an experience. A guided tour on the National Civil Rights Museum is a powerful and moving experience in and of itself. Without the program education, the additional teaching that we're doing. And so if you start there, it sets the perfect context for this conversation. It moves you to a place of asking questions and how is it and why is it that we're here? And so following that up with the connection between the history and what's happening today and what's happening in corporations today where equity is concerned and Black representation is concerned, it pulls you right into this conversation that we're having. Why are we thinking the way we're doing? We think, and how is our thought process impacting our hiring decisions? Why is it that we don't have more Black representation in our C-suite? Why is it that our succession planning isn't taking a hard look at this and correcting the problem? And then it forces you to look at yourself as a CEO leader or an executive within a corporation and say, how do I impact it? How can I change how the organization works in these ways? How do we change our development programs? How do we change our training? How do we change our hiring? It all plays well into this conversation. And oh, by the way, the people who have the most power to make this change, those are the people that we want in this conversation. They're the ones who should attend this program because they're the only ones within the organization to make change. Any conversation you're going to have about revenue or conversations about where the organization is going to go, any important conversation, the C-suite's going to be the group that has that. This is an important conversation, and those leaders need to be in the room. And I think for all the reasons that the ladies presented earlier on the connectivity from beginning to end, it puts that organization in a place to where they can have this conversation in a safe space with vulnerability and in the end come out with goals and commitments that they're going to undertake to make meaningful change within their organizations.
Thank you so much for that. You definitely shared why the focus is on the C-suite executives. So Valerie and Noel, I would like for you to answer the question, why is the focus on Black talent only? And Valerie, you spoke on that just a little bit earlier, so I would love for
Hmm.
you to share more.
Yeah, thank you, Vita. And great question, and one that I get all the time. And I like to use facts to answer that question. I gave you the one about, companies believing that they are a meritocracy, but if they really dig into their policies and practices, it's hard to find a true meritocracy. Another anecdote that I often get is we cannot find Black talent. And our data analysis across clients show that in recruiting processes, if you're truly looking at, to Charlie's point, how people are making it through the hiring process, we find that more often than not, 70 to 85% of qualified Black candidates get rejected before they even get to the hiring manager for consideration. In almost every case, we see, no matter how you look at the data, that Black talent brings up the rear in most organizations. The challenge is many organizations are combining people of color, POC, underrepresented minorities, BIPOC, pick your acronym. And what I say, whenever you're looking at data through the lens of an acronym, aggregating everybody, you're camouflaging inequity. And we know that when organizations start to focus using this approach, they will find that there's some populations that are least represented, most marginalized, most acutely impacted. Um, and I'm just saying that from what I've seen, those have been Black people. So we want you to disaggregate. If you discover that it's another population of people that are being left behind more so than others, we want you focused on that population too. But the reality is, when you focused on the most marginalized, the least represented, and you start to improve the culture and your practice and policies for those individuals, you actually improve um, inclusiveness and the culture for everyone. So our principle here is that we don't want you to ignore other communities, but we want you to understand how your decisions play out and impact the Black community specifically, with the aim of improving your organization overall for everyone.
Thank you, Valerie. Noel, would you like to share?
Well, I think the strength of Valerie's argument is really based off of the data today. But if you begin to look at historically, when did we see Black CEOs of major companies? I mean, you can count on one hand just how few that number has been, and we're still having the first, and it's the 21st century. I think we see the first group of Black people break that glass ceiling into the C-suite in the 1970s. The first Black-owned stock exchange firm on the New York Stock Exchange happens in the 1970s, and yes, we had people working on the exchange in one woman in 1940s, another gentleman in 1950s and 60s, but there wasn't a collective movement there, right? So there's this false perception that, they've always been there and they've always had the opportunity to operate at those levels. They have not. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't Black businesses. There were, but we also have seen historically attempts to, and fairly successful attempts at destroying Black business districts and communities beyond Tulsa 100 years ago, and with the establishment of our interstate highway system. And so when you start to hear what the historical accomplishments are and what has happened to the Black business community, and you put that together with the data that Valerie is seeing, the successes we have are relatively new. And a lot of them have only happened in the last 30 years, right? So it helps people understand that this whole idea of equity having been here for over 100 years, that's not the case. And so we really help people lay it out. And that's why the data suggests that African Americans, Black Americans are having the least success in these areas. And that's why we're choosing to focus on them.
And can I just add that, if you look at historically the data, I mean, the fact that our workforce will be increasingly diverse, Black and brown, and the fact that we have just the lack of, less than 4%, I think, and I might be wrong, CEOs, certainly across the board, less than 10 are CEOs of color. It's not because they're not qualified. It's not because they don't have the experience. It's because historically they continue not to get the opportunity. And when looking at the root cause of that, that has to go back to racism and the myths about who can lead and what that has really contributed to what is a definitive inequity, certainly at senior leadership. So to break that, there needs to be a concerted action. There needs to be information, certainly about the historical context, as Dr. Noel Trent shows us, about the business case, as Valerie shows, but some real soul searching and an opportunity as a team and as a board to right the wrongs with people who are qualified but are overlooked because of biases and in some cases racism that are structurally embedded at every institutional and in every organization.
And I think, to add what Janet is saying, I think what we want companies to be able to do is to find their own Ursula Burns and Ken Chenault and many others. We celebrate their accomplishments. They have done great things in corporate America. But there are more of them out there. And what we're trying to do is show historically and through the data, this is what obstructs your ability to find them. Let's help move those obstructions out of the way and get that talent moved forward.
Hey, Vita, can I make 2 points that come to mind in this conversation? The first is, both come out of a conversation that I was having with a client this morning. And the first was, he said to me, but aren't you happy with all of the change that has been made post George Floyd? And I said to him first, and Dr. Janet's comment made me think of this one. Yes, there have been a number of appointments to boards and a number, less, but a couple of people appointed to very senior positions. And by the way, those people were always qualified. Okay? They were always there. So with intention, some of them got placed on roles they were always qualified for, which is the reason for us to keep our foot on the gas here. And then he said, but Valerie, with all of that, can we just sort of breathe now? Can we take our foot off the gas? And I said, but just as there have been appointments and important ones, not enough of them, in my view, there are as many, if not more, organizations that made appointments for the sake of making appointments. And the numbers of calls that I get from leaders who were put in a position but don't have the support that they need to succeed and expected to succeed on their own without the organic support that others have. Or the chief diversity officers who were appointed, record numbers of chief diversity officers are appointed in the last 18 months, but still have no power, no access, and do not have the data or any ability to drive change, right? So, I want everybody to understand that this program that is being offered at the National Civil Rights Museum is as important as it was when George Floyd was killed as it is today. Do not get confused by a couple of appointments that have been made. There are many Ursula Burns and Ken Chenaults and out there that are looking for their opportunity, and they're already qualified for them. So we want you to come and understand how to get underneath it and find them.
One quick comment, Vita, to follow up on Valerie. The word that keeps coming to mind is sustainable. You want to build sustainable change, because making an appointment, at the top or in middle management, if you don't have a pipeline that's going to continue to grow and provide that leadership on an ongoing basis, you're not going to be able to have the real change you're looking for. And having Black representation in your executive offices. Is you have to be able to start at the beginning, hiring at the beginning of careers, and then helping individuals develop throughout the organization in order to have sustainable change. And there's intentionality about that organizations have to undertake. And through the program, it really is asking you to open your eyes around how you're, and Valerie does a great job about it, how are you hiring, and those practices as well. Janet makes you think about why you're making those decisions. And it's those things are very, very important in order to build sustainable change. And that's what we're hoping with this program, that we're going to get you in the mindset of. It certainly made us as AutoZone think through a lot of questions that we were asking ourselves after we walked out of that room, and then ongoing work to make improvements.
Thank you for adding that, Charlie. And so basically what we're talking about is equity. So the C-Suite initiative is a part of the Corporate Equity Center. And so I have the question, why equity? Why is the focus on equity and not diversity or inclusion?
So I could kick off here. So it's not that those other letters are diversity, inclusion, belonging, equality are not important, but equity is the one component that we still feel many people confuse. Many people still confuse equality versus equity. And so we have it in the module where we walk leaders through the difference and what to look for. You can have equal policies that have inevitable outcomes, inequitable outcomes. And we want leaders to understand the differences and be able to know what to look for. So, using that early example, you can implement an equal opportunity hiring policy, have it on your websites, yet still screen out 85% of qualified Black candidates, right? And so we delve into that component so that leaders know not only the difference between the two, equality and equity, but also know how to look for inequity and ask questions and root it out in their policies.
And from a brain perspective, when we talk about bias and certainly look at the SEEDS model, which looks at we have over 150 different biases looking at the top five, when we can use our brain to mitigate that bias so that we can have equity in the fact that we may see someone who may be a different gender, sexual orientation, may be a different ethnicity, that we can see who they really are in terms of what they bring versus feel threatened by them. And that is another bridge to equity where anyone has an equal opportunity, who is seen as equal, seen as equitable, and able to make that transition without having to be judged, without having to be challenged, and they are accepted on the merits that they have.
And to add to what my colleagues have said, I think from a historical perspective, equity considers the context of the individual. Equality tends to be very ideological, that this is the policy and ideally everybody's treated the same and this will come out with some great outcomes. The equity piece says, okay, that may be your intention, but let's talk about the biases. Let's talk about the other ways and the context that's affecting this from happening in the way that you think it should. And I think once we start to pull at that cord and help people understand that and see the context, and they can understand the data and the language that they use and how that has affected them, we have seen in these groups the light bulbs go off. Midway through Valerie's session, something starts to click, and everything that they've begun to experience starts to fire off, and they begin to understand, oh my goodness, this is what we've been doing wrong. And you can see folks, coworkers looking at each other, board members saying, we got to change this policy. And so there's something that happens that once you kind of understand the context historically and psychologically, and the data starts helping you understand things operationally, this inequity thing becomes very heavy, but it's also very exciting because you see the opportunities for progress and change.
And without the equity piece, I mean, you can really get diversity and you can include people. Without the equity, you can't keep them. You don't have the sustainability. And it's the biggest piece that I think everybody's really trying to wrap their minds around right now. It's not just about pay. It's about the programs and policies that you have in place.
Thank you. We have had some really robust discussions about the Corporate Equity Center's, the C-Suite initiative. And so what I would like to do now is to give each of you a moment just to share any final thoughts that you may have.
Yeah, so first I would just say thank you to AutoZone for having the courage to fund and support the program. And Charlie, you've just been an incredible partner. It's been amazing to work with and get to know Dr. Janet better and Dr. Noel. Um, we really want to see boards and C-suite teams make the trip to Memphis to experience this program. It is a perfect 2 to 3 day offsite for your teams. We promise it will change how you approach the subject of diversity and equity. It will impact your team in a way that collectively, individually and collectively, like no other program can. And so I'm really excited to see more organizations come through it and to get this very unique 3 component program that we've designed for you. And so I look forward to seeing many more of you in Memphis. Thanks very much for the opportunity too.
I echo Valerie's thanks, but also say certainly the past 2 years have taught us through disruption the opportunity to create something new. And that opportunity begins with you as an individual and certainly as a team and as a board, and really have just an incredible chance to utilize your learning and take the context of history and challenge yourself in a way that makes you better. And there's never been a more important time in my lifetime that we have to look at ourselves as individuals, as part of humanity, and try to do something differently so that we can bring equity and diversity and inclusion to the workplace, which we know also goes to our places where we live or where we worship, and bring new thinking in a way that can just improve how we all live and give people the opportunities that they deserve, much as for Black people for the past 400 years, we certainly have been fighting for, and truly live up to the words of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King.
I'll repeat something that our CEO said at our press conference. AutoZone, certainly we're excited about this program, and we're excited about our this commitment to the National Civil Rights Museum. We've had a long-standing relationship with the museum, but we're more excited to see other companies step in with us, join us in this, and helping this program grow. And the only way that happens is we get additional commitments. We put the seed money in place to help this get started, but this is just the first initiative from the Equity Corporation that we put in place at the museum. The Equity Center is designed to not only incorporate just this conversation, but other conversations to help further equity and try and eradicate the injustices that happen in the Black community.
So I echo everything that the rest of the panel has stated. I think that I encounter a lot of people through this work who care about other people. They care about what's happening in the world. And I cannot count the number of times people have said, what can I do? How can I do better? And even when I've done presentations to different groups, corporate groups, nonprofit groups, even governmental organizations, there is a need for some sort of guidance. And this has allowed us, this generous donation from AutoZone has allowed us to say, okay, here is the answer. You will absolutely be able to walk away from this experience with some tools, with a way to create some sustainable change in your organization, but then you'll also see it within your own life. One of the things that I emphasize to all of our groups who visit is that the National Civil Rights Museum will stick with you in the days, weeks, months, and even years to come. So I promise you that if you find nothing more, and I'm be very surprised if you don't get something from what Janet and Valerie share with you, but just the tour itself is going to be something that will linger with you for years to come and affect how you move and operate in the world. And everything else that you encounter has some tangible impact and will alter your engagement with the world. And that's what we want to see. We are excited about this program. We promise that this is unlike any other corporate training where, we have fun. Yes, we're dealing with emotional topics, we're dealing with triggering topics, but there's a lot of fun that happens. Janet, Valerie, and I love engaging with each other. The dinner, the first night, is a wonderful experience for all of us to let our hair down and get to know each other. So this is going to be a empowering experience, but it's also a fun experience. And we really do hope that you come to Memphis so that you can not only learn more about Black history and dealing with this issue of equity, but also learn more about Memphis and how we choose to live and work in the global community.
Thank you, Noelle, Valerie, Janet, and Charlie, for your commitment to the C-Suite Initiative and equity. It is an honor to lead the Corporate Equity Center for the National Civil Rights Museum. As we work together to provide guiding goals to drive progress, effectiveness, and ongoing tangible outcomes for the inclusion of Black executives in senior leadership in C-suite positions across industries. Thank all of you for joining us. For more information, please visit corporateequitycenter.org. We look forward to hearing from you and helping your organization drive change through the C-Suite Initiative Training Program.